we're going to talk a lot about on November 5th. But what about after the election with respect to how states certify their election results? I'm reading from Votebeat right now. New rules in Georgia governing how local officials finalize vote totals have some election watchdogs worried that loyalists of former President Donald Trump could trigger a crisis if he loses the state in November by abusing their authority to delay or avoid certifying results. So yes, we're covering before the election. The votes will be counted on November 5th and after. But when these states have to certify, how might it look? How might it be different from 2020? How might it be similar here in Georgia? In particular, one of the battleground states we're going to be keenly focused on here. It has some election watchdogs worried, according to Votebeat. Let's talk to Votebeat, including their reporter there, Jessica Huseman. She joins me, and we want to bring up with her just some of her reporting and what she has found. Jessica, good to see you here. I know you've been following this very closely. I guess my question to you first off, aside from some of the respective states, each state does this differently, don't they, in how they choose to certify their electoral count. Sometimes codified in state law, other times it's not here. So how are we to make sense of that? Oh, and Jessica, I think you're muted there.
How's this? I apologize. It works exactly the same way that so much else in our elections do, which is that every single state has a different system. Every single state is using different voting machines. Every single state is using different counting methods. None of them are necessarily better or worse than the other, but they are different. And so because they're different, they have to be certified and validated in different ways. And so some states will allow this process to go on for quite some time. So for example, in California, they have almost 2 weeks to certify the election because it's a heavily mail state and they let all of those ballots come in as long as they're postmarked by a certain date. Other states must release results within 24 hours by state law. So it really varies depending on where you are. And if you're confused about what your state will be doing, your Secretary of State is the best resource for that.
What about some of these lessons from 2020? It was so interesting back then. I remember it well in states like Nevada and Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania. There was such a keen focus on the date of certification. Are we going to see that again, do you think? Because from what you've reported, from what we know, it seems like that's it. If you do want to challenge some of the results, you have to make it before these certification deadlines here. And so will any lessons be learned from the 2020 election this time around?
I think certainly the courts are more prepared to deal with these issues. If you remember from 2020 and 2022, when these typically deeply red counties decided to delay certification, that almost always resulted in court action. And there was not a single county that was successful in delaying or denying certification. And I expect the same to be true this year. In fact, a lot of states have passed laws that will make it harder for these folks to challenge in the same way that they did. And so I think in every state, the people who attempt these things are facing an uphill battle.
I want to ask, though, what if the campaigns want to initiate some of these challenges after certification? Do they have any recourse to do that?
The only recourse they would have is to sue in courts and ask judge to overturn the results of the election. That would be extraordinary, and it has not happened at a very wide scale. There are a couple of very, very small local elections that have been overturned because of some massive malfeasance. But in terms of an election that's that big, it simply hasn't happened. And I think you can look to 2020 as an example of what's likely to continue happening. Donald Trump tried his hardest to prove that he had won the 2020 election. Not a single court bought it. And I would imagine that the same would be true this time around.
All right, let's focus in on some of these battleground states. You guys there at Votebeat, multi-byline story here. Focus intently on Georgia. Now, we can extrapolate from Georgia into the other battleground states, but what would you say the trend is? Are some of these state election officials, state legislatures, are they tightening up how they certify, or are they loosening how they certify?
This is such an interesting question. So, legislatures are tending to sort of tighten and to make more specific certification procedures. The body that you see acting in Georgia is not the legislature and it's not the Secretary of State's office. It is the State Board of Elections, which can make rules but cannot obviously pass laws. And so, in that one state, they are moving towards tightening the way that they do certification. And by that, I mean they're going to make certification harder. They are leaving room open for people who are dissatisfied with the results to challenge the results or to request more information. And the worry on behalf of advocates in Georgia, certainly, but also the Republican Secretary of State there, is that these rules are unnecessary and will only delay certification. Georgia is one of the states that cannot certify statewide unless every single county has certified already. And so one county could truly delay certification in that state. But, as I said before, the courts are anticipating this. The people who are interested in actively challenging certifications are being loud about it. They are not keeping it a secret. And so the people who are going to oppose them are preparing every day. And so I think that if we see a county in Georgia attempt to delay certification, you will see swift action by the state, specifically the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah, and we've spoken with Brad Raffensperger here on Live Now in the wake of all of this back in 2020 and recently, and he was kind of leading the charge against some of these efforts there. Of course, he runs the Secretary of State's office. He's been front and center about how to streamline some of this there in the Peach State as well here. But I also had to ask, because when you talk about certification, it is technical. And I think a lot of viewers maybe who are watching are asking themselves, does this mean we won't have a result of the presidential election for days, if not weeks, after November 5th? Does it get in the way of that?
You know what? I think it's really important for your viewers to know that we have never had a presidential election result, an official finalized presidential election result, until the safe harbor day, which is when every single state has certified their election. This year, that's not until December 6th. That's not to say that we won't know who won, right? We can see from returns, the media makes calls on election night. These tend to be accurate, but
Sure.
You and I both seen mistakes, but those results that we see on election day or the day after are not official results. And so they will have to wait until they are certified to be official. But I would imagine that we would know basically who's won and who's won every race all the way down the ballot unless incredibly close and moves to a recount.
So, Jessica, we're what, 64, 63 days out until November 5th here. Is that enough time for some of these electoral councils and bodies and state legislatures, if they want to do anything with certification, modify it, change it, pick at it here and there? Can they, or is it not enough time? I mean, are these laborious, lengthy procedures? That's one question. But if you're the campaigns here, what is the threshold to challenge certification in the wake of the election? Can you do it for anything?
Yeah. Well, so to answer your first question, I think that time is definitely running out, right? The courts have in past held to this rule that they do not change election laws close to the election. I think that any attorney worth his or her salt would probably challenge any changes, and they would probably be successful on the basis that it's so close to the election. But practically, the only state that's really making moves in this direction is Georgia through its State Board of Elections. And so that's the only state that most people are really worried about. In terms of the campaigns, I would love to tell you that there is a threshold, and traditionally, it has been very rare for presidential campaigns to sue as a result of the election unless something really striking happens. Right. 2000 was what it was. Sure. Both campaigns sued. That was a really massive meltdown. In 2020, nothing went wrong, really.
Yeah.
Very little to complain about, and Donald Trump still filed dozens of lawsuits. And so I would say that, at least for his campaign, there is no bar.
You know, to that point, just lastly, I keep coming up with questions here because this is a very interesting conversation here. For example, in Georgia in 2020, 3 recounts were done in Georgia. Are you finding that, you know, with whatever the outcome in some of these states in the wake of presidential elections are, that the states have the procedures in place to allay some of these voters' concerns who may think some of the vote tabulation was fraudulent, if even that is baseless, that there aren't necessarily recourses to allay some of those fears here, but for getting into the courts?
You know, I think that states have gotten a lot better about this. It used to be that secretaries of state's offices and county clerks' offices were not very conducive to speaking to the media or to explaining things down to the wire to their public because they were busy, they have a lot to do. Since 2020, they have gotten so much better at this. And so in the last 4 years, I've seen state officials and local officials who previously did not do any of this open up their testing to the public, open up their voting machine warehouses to the public, and giving security tours and giving explanations for how all of the processes work. In addition to that, states have also taken pains to figure out what they will do in the event of a challenged result after the election day.
Okay.
You mentioned the 3 recounts in Georgia, and they sort of made those decisions really quickly and without expectation. This year, that will be an expectation, and they will be ready to go. And there are people who specialize in recounting votes, believe it or not. So those people will be all over the country.
Yeah, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Jessica Huseman with Votebeat. Can't thank you enough. Interesting conversation. I think we'll be talking again in the run-up to November 5th.
Anytime.
Thank you.